The executioner's blade was meant for a traitor's neck. It was not meant for her. Sorin had spent 19 years learning to be invisible. As an Omega servant in the household of Lord Harwick, she had perfected the art of existing without being seen, of breathing without being heard. She scrubbed floors. She emptied chamber pots. She kept her branded forehead hidden beneath a strip of dirty cloth and never, ever drew attention to herself. So when King Theron of Valdrin raised his blade to execute the condemned man, Sorin did not know what possessed her to move. One moment she was pressed against the wall with the other servants, eyes downcast. The next, she was standing between the most powerful alpha in the realm and his blade, her arms spread wide, her heart slamming against her ribs. The hall went utterly silent. The king's sword had stopped an inch from her throat. His pale eyes, gray as winter ice, stared at her with an expression she couldn't name. Shock, perhaps, or fury, or something far more dangerous. No one in living memory had seen King Theron hesitate. Then a voice cut through the silence. Old, trembling, awed. The prophecy, the royal seer whispered. When mercy stands before the blade, the stone heart shall finally break. She's the one we've waited for. The king's jaw tightened. Something passed across his face, just for an instant. Something almost like pain. His free hand pressed against his chest, directly over his heart. What Sorin didn't know was that beneath his palm, stone was beginning to spread. What she didn't know was that for the first time in 300 years, a king of Valdrin had felt the forbidden pull of mercy, and the ancient curse had begun to wake. He should have killed her. The law demanded it. His survival required it. Instead, he lowered his blade and said two words that would change both their fates forever. Take her. Neither of them understood what those words would cost. Neither of them knew that mercy would become the most dangerous thing either had ever felt. The morning had begun like any other. Sorin had risen before dawn, her thin blanket offering little protection against the cold stone floor of the servants' quarters. Her body ached from yesterday's labor, and today would be no different. It never was. She dressed quickly in the darkness, pulling her worn tunic over her head, securing the cloth strip across her forehead to hide the brand beneath. The mark had been seared into her skin 4 years ago, the crossed circle that identified her as someone whose gifts had been bound, someone whose very nature was considered a threat to the natural order. Dangerous seer, the brand proclaimed. Magic bound by order of the High Oracle. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was what they said she'd done to earn it. Sorin pushed the memory away and slipped into the corridor, beginning her rounds. The Harwick estate was vast, a sprawling stone manor that housed one of Valdrin's oldest noble families. Lord Harwick himself barely acknowledged her existence, which suited her perfectly. His wife occasionally threw objects at her head. His son looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl. Invisible, she reminded herself, as she scrubbed the great hall's floors. You are invisible. You are nothing. You are safe. The commotion began around midday. Servants rushed through the corridors with wild eyes. The head housekeeper, a sharp-tongued beta named Morna, grabbed Sorin's arm hard enough to bruise. "The king is coming," Morna hissed. "Here, today, for the execution." Dread coiled in Sorin's chest. Execution? Lord Harwick's brother. Morna's voice dropped lower. Treason. Conspiring against the crown. The king is delivering justice personally. Her grip tightened. You stay in the back. You stay silent. You don't even breathe too loudly, understand? The king doesn't tolerate Omega presence. Sorin nodded, but her heart was already racing. She knew the stories about King Theron. Everyone in Valdrin did. They called him the Stone King, though never to his face. Cold, brutal, merciless. In the 12 years since he'd taken the throne at 17, he had never once granted clemency. Not to nobles, not to commoners, not to his own blood. His father had been the same, and his grandfather before that. Some whispered it was a curse, though no one dared speak such things aloud. The kings of Valdrin did not show mercy, and those who suggested otherwise had a way of disappearing. By late afternoon, the great hall had been transformed. Banners bearing the royal crest hung from the rafters. The noble families of the region had gathered, dressed in their finest, their faces carefully neutral. Lord Harwick stood near the front, his expression grim. His brother knelt in chains at the center of the hall, his head bowed in defeat. And then the king arrived. Sorin felt him before she saw him. An alpha presence rolled through the doors like a winter storm, so powerful it pressed against her chest and made it hard to breathe. She wasn't the only one affected. Around her, servants cowered. Even the nobles seemed to shrink. Then she saw him, and understanding swept through her like a flood. King Theron was tall, taller than any man she had ever seen, broad-shouldered and lean, with the kind of predatory grace that spoke of violence barely leashed. His hair was the color of winter wheat, pale gold falling past his shoulders. His face was beautiful, beautiful the way a blade was beautiful, all sharp edges and cold precision. But his eyes were what held her. Gray, pale gray like frost on stone, and utterly, completely empty. He looked at the kneeling prisoner the way someone might look at an insect. No hatred, no satisfaction, nothing at all. Aldrich Harwick, the king said, and his voice was exactly what she'd expected. Cold, measured, devoid of warmth. You have been found guilty of conspiring against the crown. The sentence is death. He drew his sword. The blade sang as it cleared the scabbard, gleaming in the torchlight. Aldrich Harwick didn't beg. Perhaps he knew it would be useless. Perhaps he'd already made peace with his fate. The king raised the blade, and Sorin moved. She didn't decide to do it. Later, she would try to understand what had happened, would replay the moment over and over in her mind. But in that instant, something surged through her, something ancient and overwhelming, and her body simply acted without her permission. One moment she was pressed against the wall. The next, she was standing directly in front of the king's descending blade, her arms spread wide, her eyes locked on his. The sword stopped an inch from her throat. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. The king stared at her, his pale eyes wide. For one heartbeat, two. Something surfaced in their depths. Surprise, confusion, and then, just for an instant, something that looked almost like longing. His sword arm trembled. "What is this?" someone shouted. "Seize her! She's interfered with the king's justice." But no one moved. No one could. Because every person in that hall had witnessed the impossible. King Theron had hesitated. A frail voice rose from the corner, where the royal seer sat hunched in her chair. Old Berith, they called her. The woman who'd served 3 generations of kings. Her milky eyes found Sorin through the crowd. "The prophecy," she breathed. "When mercy stands before the blade, the stone heart shall finally break." She pointed one gnarled finger directly at Sorin. "She's the one. She's the one we've waited 300 years for." The king's face went pale. His free hand flew to his chest, pressing hard against his heart, and Sorin saw something that made no sense. Pain. Real, genuine pain twisting his features for just a moment before the mask slammed back into place. When he spoke, his voice was ice. "Take her." Guards seized Sorin's arms, dragging her backward. The last thing she saw before they hauled her from the hall was the king's hand still pressed against his heart, and beneath his fingers, just visible above his collar, a patch of skin that had turned the color of stone. They threw her in a cell. Sorin hit the stone floor hard, her palms scraping against the rough surface. The iron door clanged shut behind her, And then there was only darkness and the sound of her own ragged breathing. She was going to die. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt strangely calm. Perhaps because she'd been living on borrowed time for 4 years already. Perhaps because death had been stalking her shadow since the night they branded her forehead and called her a murderer. Time passed. Hours, perhaps. Or minutes. She couldn't tell. When the cell door finally opened, she expected guards. She expected chains. She expected to be dragged to her execution. She did not expect the king himself. Theron stood in the doorway, alone, a single torch casting flickering shadows across his face. Up close, he was even more devastating. The sharp line of his jaw, the elegant slope of his cheekbones, the way his pale eyes seemed to cut through her like blades. But there was something else too, something she hadn't noticed in the great hall. He was cold, not figuratively, literally cold. She could feel it radiating from him even from several feet away, a chill that seeped into her bones and made her teeth want to chatter. No shifter should feel like that. Alphas ran hot. Everyone knew it. And yet, this man felt like winter given form. "Stand," he commanded. Theron stood on shaking legs. For a long moment he simply looked at her, studied her. His gaze moved from her face to her worn clothing to the strip of cloth across her forehead, and there it stopped. "Remove it." Her heart seized. "Your Majesty, Remove it. Now." Her hands trembled as she reached up and pulled the cloth away, revealing the brand beneath, the crossed circle, the mark of a bound seer. The king's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his scent. Something she couldn't quite name. "You're a seer," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I was," Soren whispered, "before they bound me." "Why were you bound?" She swallowed hard. "They say I killed a man, a nobleman named Oren. They say my visions drove him mad, that I showed him things that shattered his mind and stopped his heart." "Did you?" The question hung in the air between them. No one had ever asked her that before. They had simply assumed, accused, condemned. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "My gift was wild back then, uncontrolled. I saw things about people, truths they wanted hidden. Oren was engaged to my sister. He seemed kind, good, but when I looked at him I saw—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't know if I showed him or if he simply saw what I saw, but he died screaming, and everyone said it was my fault." Silence stretched between them. Then the king said something that made no sense at all. "You should have let me kill him." Theron blinked. "Your Majesty?" "In the great hall. The traitor. You should have let me execute him." His voice was flat, but something stirred beneath the surface. "It would have been easier, for both of us." "I don't understand." Theron turned away, pacing toward the small barred window. The moonlight caught his profile, illuminating the tension in his jaw, the rigid set of his shoulders. "There is a curse on my bloodline," he said quietly. "Placed by a powerful seer 300 years ago, before the oracles learned to control such things. Every king since has carried it." He paused. "If we show mercy, we die. Our hearts turn to stone. Literally." Soren's breath caught. "That's why you're so cold." He turned to look at her, and for just an instant his mask slipped. She saw exhaustion beneath, grief, an ancient bone-deep weariness. "Every act of harshness keeps me alive," he said. "Every cruelty pushes back the stone. But every time I feel the pull of mercy, even for a moment." He pressed his hand against his chest. It spreads. A chill raced down her spine. "In the great hall, when you hesitated, the stone spread further than it has in years." His eyes locked onto hers. "Because of you." Soren's legs nearly gave out. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I don't know why I—" "Neither do I," He stepped closer, and the cold intensified, wrapping around her like an embrace. But the seer spoke of a prophecy, one I've known about since childhood. When mercy stands before the blade, the stone heart shall finally break. What does that mean? Either you will save me, Theron said slowly, or you will kill me. I haven't yet decided which. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, pressing it into her hands. This is a contract, he explained. You will become my mercy proxy. Every act of clemency, every pardon, every kindness the crown must show will flow through you. You will be mercy on my behalf, so I never have to feel it myself. Soren stared at the document, her mind reeling. And in exchange? You live. You receive protection, quarters in the palace, and servants of your own. No one will touch you or threaten you again. His voice hardened. But there is one condition. You must never make me feel mercy myself. You must never make me care about you, or anyone else, or anything at all. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. You must never make me love. The words hit her like a physical blow. Something in his tone, some undercurrent of desperation, made her chest ache. And if I refuse? She asked. Then you die tonight, and I continue as I have for 12 years. His eyes held hers. But the prophecy suggests you might be my only chance, the only way to end this curse forever. I'm asking you to take that chance with me. Soren looked at the contract in her hands, at the brand on her forehead, at the cold, beautiful king who was offering her impossible terms for an impossible arrangement. She should refuse. She should demand death, rather than bind herself to a man who could never feel anything for her, a man who would use her as a shield against his own humanity. But then she remembered Lord Harwick's son and his wandering hands. She remembered the brand and the accusations. She remembered 4 years of being nothing, no one, and invisible. The king was offering her purpose, protection, a life. All she had to give up was any hope of being loved. Cold over cruelty, she thought. I'll choose cold every time. I accept, she whispered. Something moved behind Theron's eyes. Relief, perhaps, or resignation. Then it's done. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing, he said, without looking back. You asked why I hesitated in the Great Hall, why I didn't simply strike you down. His hand tightened on the doorframe. I don't know the answer, and that terrifies me more than you can possibly imagine. Then he was gone, leaving Soren alone in the dark with a contract that bound her to a man of stone and a single, devastating truth. She was already starting to care about him. 3 days later, Soren stood in the throne room of Valdrin's royal palace, surrounded by more nobility than she'd ever seen in her life. The mercy proxy ceremony was, apparently, an ancient tradition, though one that hadn't been performed in generations. The last proxy had served King Theron's great-grandfather, and she had died under mysterious circumstances that no one seemed willing to discuss. Soren tried not to think about that as she knelt on the cold marble floor, her head bowed, the weight of 1,000 stairs pressing down on her shoulders. She had been bathed, dressed, and prepared by a team of servants who seemed uncertain whether to treat her as a lady or a prisoner. The gown they'd given her was simple but well-made, dark blue fabric that covered her from neck to ankle. Her hair had been brushed until it shone, pulled back from her face in a style that left her forehead exposed. The brand was visible to everyone. That had been deliberate, she suspected. Let them see what she was. Let them fear her. The High Oracle Mordrin stood at the front of the assembly, his ceremonial robes cascading around him like a silver waterfall. He was old, older than anyone she'd ever seen, his face a map of wrinkles, his eyes like chips of obsidian buried in folds of papery skin. Those eyes had found Soren the moment she'd entered the throne room, and they hadn't looked away since. "We are gathered," the High Oracle intoned, his voice carrying through the vast space, "to witness the binding of a mercy proxy to the crown of Valdrin. This woman shall carry the burden of compassion so that our king may remain strong. She shall be mercy's vessel, and in being so, she shall preserve the throne." The words should have sounded noble. Instead, they felt like chains. A door opened at the far end of the hall, and the king entered. Theron wore formal black today, a fitted coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, the lean power of his frame. A thin crown of silver rested on his pale gold hair. He looked every inch the ruthless monarch, cold and untouchable, and impossibly beautiful. But Soren noticed something the others couldn't see. He was pale, paler than he'd been 3 days ago. And when he moved, there was a stiffness to his gait that spoke of pain carefully hidden. The stone was spreading. Theron ascended his throne and sat, his gaze sweeping over the assembly before landing on her. For just a moment, something passed between them. An acknowledgement. A shared secret. Then his expression shuddered, and he was the Stone King once more. "Rise," he commanded. Sorin rose. The High Oracle approached her, producing a thin silver chain from the folds of his robes. At its center hung a small medallion stamped with the royal crest. "This chain binds you to the crown," Mordrin said, fastening it around her neck. His fingers were cold, colder even than the king's, and his touch made her skin crawl. "You speak with the king's voice in matters of mercy. You pardon whom he cannot pardon. You spare whom he cannot spare." The medallion settled against her chest, heavy and cold. "Do you accept this burden?" the oracle asked. "I do." "Do you swear to never use your position to influence the king's heart?" The question caught her off guard. She glanced at Theron, but his face revealed nothing. "I swear," she said. "And do you understand that violation of this oath is punishable by death?" "I understand." The oracle smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then let it be witnessed. The Omega Sorin is now mercy proxy to King Theron of Valdrin. May she serve well and die quietly when her usefulness ends." A murmur rippled through the crowd at that last phrase. It wasn't traditional. It wasn't part of the ceremony. It was a warning. Sorin kept her face neutral, but her hands curled into fists at her sides. "Lord Harwick," the king's voice cut through the whispers, "step forward." Her stomach dropped as her former master emerged from the crowd. Lord Harwick looked older than she remembered, his face gray, his eyes hollow. He had lost his brother to the king's blade 3 days ago, and it showed. He also looked at Sorin with pure, undisguised hatred. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing. "The mercy proxy was your servant," Theron said calmly. "You kept her for 4 years, worked her, used her." His voice dropped. "Tell me, Lord Harwick, did you know she was a seer when you purchased her contract?" Harwick's face went pale. Your Majesty, The High Oracle's records indicate you paid a significant sum for her. Far more than an ordinary servant would command." Theron's eyes were ice. Why would a nobleman pay so much for a branded woman? Unless he knew her gift was merely bound, not destroyed. Unless he intended to use that gift for himself? Sorin's heart stuttered. She hadn't known this. Hadn't suspected. I would never," Harwick stammered. "Using a bound seer is treason against the Oracle's authority," Theron continued. "Almost as treasonous as, say, conspiring against the crown." He tilted his head. "Your brother was executed for that crime. I wonder how much you knew about his plans." The hall had gone utterly silent. "Your Majesty, please." Harwick fell to his knees. "Have mercy. I have a wife, children, Mercy." The word came out sharp as a blade. "You dare ask me for mercy?" Sorin felt the shift in the room, the anticipation. Everyone expected the king to order Harwick's death. It was what he did. What he always did. Instead, Theron turned to her. "This is your first duty as Mercy Proxy," he said. "Lord Harwick's fate is in your hands. Spare him or condemn him. The choice is yours." The weight of the moment pressed down on her. Every eye in the hall was fixed on her face. Harwick himself stared at her with a mixture of hope and terror, and beneath it, that same hatred, that same contempt he'd always shown her. This man had worked her until her hands bled, had let his son corner her in dark hallways, had known what she was and planned to exploit it. She could destroy him with a word, but she thought of his children, who had never been cruel to her. She thought of the cycle of violence that seemed to be all Valdrin knew, and she thought of the king, watching her with those pale, unreadable eyes, waiting to see what she would do. "Let him live," Sorin said quietly. "Strip his titles if the crime warrants it. Seize his assets, but let him and his family live." Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd. No one had expected this. Certainly not Harwick, whose face crumbled with relief even as guards stepped forward to take him away. Through it all, the king's expression never changed, but she saw him press his hand briefly against his chest, and she understood. Her mercy had cost him nothing. She had been the one to grant it, not him. The curse hadn't stirred. The system worked. But as the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Sorin noticed the High Oracle watching her with an expression that made her uneasy. It wasn't anger. It was calculation, assessment, and it was fixed on her with the intensity of a predator who had just spotted prey. "Proxy!" a voice called out. Sorin turned to find a young woman approaching through the crowd. She was beautiful, with dark hair and sharp features, dressed in the fine clothing of a noble lady. Something about her face seemed familiar, though Sorin couldn't place it. Then the woman drew closer, and recognition hit like a physical blow. "Brilla," Sorin breathed. Her sister smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Hello, sister," Brilla said. "Did you really think you could rise this high and I wouldn't notice?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only Sorin could hear. "The High Oracle knows what you really are. He knows that Seer's brand isn't the whole story." Her smile sharpened. "And he knows exactly what you did to Orin." Sorin's heart stopped. "I didn't," she started. "Save it." Brilla's eyes glittered with malice. "The Oracle doesn't just want you dead, sister. He wants to use you first. And when he's done, when he's broken the king with you as his weapon—" She leaned in close enough that her breath brushed Sorin's ear. "He'll make sure everyone knows the truth about the night Orin died, including what really happened to our mother." Before Sorin could respond, Brilla turned and vanished into the crowd, leaving nothing behind but the cold weight of her words. Sorin stood frozen, her mind reeling. The High Oracle wanted to use her. Her sister knew secrets that could destroy her. And somewhere beneath it all, buried in the past she'd tried so hard to forget, was a truth about her mother's death that she had never fully understood. She looked across the room to where the king stood, surrounded by advisors, already moving on to the next crisis. He caught her eye for just a moment. And in that moment, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not coldness, not cruelty, fear. The same fear she felt. Whatever was coming, they were both trapped in it now, bound together by prophecy, by contract, by something neither of them could name. And someone was already working to tear them apart. The first week in the palace passed in a blur of ceremony and whispers. Sorin had been given chambers in the eastern wing, far grander than anything she'd ever imagined. A sitting room with velvet furniture, a bedchamber with a canopied bed large enough for 4 people. A private bathing room with heated water that flowed from copper pipes in the walls. She had servants now, too, 3 women who attended her every need. Nisara, a quiet beta with kind eyes. Vadith, an older Omega who moved with efficient grace, and young Kaleith, barely 16, who seemed perpetually terrified of saying the wrong thing. They treated her with cautious respect, uncertain of her status. She wasn't noble. She wasn't truly a servant anymore. She existed in a space between, belonging nowhere, just like always. Her duties as mercy proxy began immediately. Each morning, petitioners gathered in the Hall of Supplicants, commoners and minor nobles seeking clemency from the crown. A farmer whose taxes had been miscalculated, a merchant imprisoned for debts he couldn't pay, a mother begging for her son's release from the army. Sorin heard them all. She studied each case carefully, weighing circumstance against law, compassion against consequence. Some she granted mercy. Others she denied, when the evidence suggested manipulation or deceit. The king never attended these sessions. That was the point. Her mercy was not his mercy. Her compassion did not threaten his heart. But sometimes, late at night, she would find documents on her desk that hadn't been there before. Notes in a sharp, elegant hand suggesting she look more closely at a particular case. Questions that guided her toward truths she might have missed. He was watching, helping, in his own distant way. On the 7th night, Sorin couldn't sleep. She wandered the palace corridors in her nightgown, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the persistent chill that seemed to permeate the stone walls. The guards nodded as she passed but didn't stop her. Apparently, the mercy proxy had freedom to roam. She found herself drawn to the palace gardens, a vast expanse of manicured hedges and flowering trees that gleamed silver under the moonlight. The air was cool but fresh, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine. She wasn't alone. The king stood at the center of the garden, beside a fountain that had long since stopped flowing. He wore no crown tonight, no formal coat. Just a simple white shirt, unlaced at the throat, and dark trousers. His hair was loose around his shoulders, and in the moonlight, he looked younger, more vulnerable, more human. He turned at her approach, and for a moment something shifted across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or something softer. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you, Your Majesty." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I don't sleep well. Never have." Sorin moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "The curse?" He nodded slowly. "Sleep requires letting go, relaxing one's guard." He looked down at his hands. "I can't afford that luxury. Even in dreams I must stay vigilant. One moment of softness, one flicker of compassion for someone in a nightmare, and I wake to find the stone has spread." The weight of it hit her anew. He couldn't even dream without danger. "How much?" she asked quietly. "How much of you is stone now?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, wordlessly, he reached up and began to unbutton his shirt. Sorin's breath caught. He pulled the fabric aside, revealing his chest in the moonlight, and she had to bite back a gasp. The stone covered nearly half of it. It started at the center, directly over his heart, a patch of gray that looked exactly like granite. From there, it spread outward in jagged lines, creeping across his chest like frost on a window. The edges were uneven, some tendrils reaching toward his shoulder, others crawling down toward his stomach. "It was only here when I took the throne," Theron said, touching a spot no larger than a coin. 12 years of rule, and this is what remains of me." Sorin stepped closer without thinking. Her hand rose, hovering over the stone surface. "May I?" He went very still. "Why?" "I don't know," she admitted. I need to." A pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Her fingers touched the stone, and cold shot through her, so intense it made her gasp. But beneath the cold, she felt something else. A pulse. Faint, struggling, but unmistakably alive. "You're still in there," she whispered. "Beneath all of it, You're still fighting. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm flat against the stone over his heart. His skin was ice where it touched hers, but she didn't pull away. Sometimes I wonder, he said quietly, what it would feel like to stop fighting, to simply let the stone take me and feel nothing ever again. That's not living. No, he agreed. But it's not dying either. It's just existing. The way I've existed for 12 years. His gray eyes found hers in the darkness. Until you. Her heart stuttered. Your Majesty? Theron, he interrupted. When we're alone. Just Theron. The intimacy of it made her dizzy. Theron, she repeated, and the name felt like a secret on her tongue. His thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made her ache. You confuse me, he admitted. I've spent my entire life learning to feel nothing, and then you step in front of my blade and suddenly… He shook his head. I don't understand what's happening. Neither did she. But standing here in the moonlight, her hand pressed against the stone that was slowly killing him, she understood one thing with perfect clarity. She was falling for him. It was impossible. It was dangerous. It was the one thing she had sworn never to let happen. But her heart didn't seem to care about oaths or curses or the 1,000 reasons this could only end in tragedy. I should go, she whispered. But she didn't move. Yes, he agreed, but his hand tightened on hers. They stood like that for a long moment, neither willing to break the connection. The fountain beside them sat silent, its waters frozen for years, perhaps decades. Then Theron released her hand and stepped back, his expression closing off like a door slamming shut. Good night, Proxy, he said, and the formal title was a wall between them. Good night, Your Majesty, she returned, accepting the distance. She walked back to her chambers on unsteady legs, her hand still tingling from his touch, her heart still racing from the look in his eyes. This was dangerous. This was foolish. This would destroy them both. But as she lay in her bed staring at the canopy above her, she couldn't stop thinking about the pulse she'd felt beneath the stone. He was still fighting, still alive beneath the curse that was killing him. And somehow, impossibly, she had become part of that fight. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Soren had ever experienced. She and Theron fell into a pattern, one that neither of them acknowledged aloud, but both of them honored. During the day, they were king and proxy, formal and distant, separated by protocol and the ever-watchful eyes of the court. But at night, in the moonlit garden, they found each other. They talked for hours. He told her about his childhood, about a father who had been cold even by the standards of their cursed line, who had beaten any hint of softness out of him before he was old enough to understand why. He told her about his mother, who had died giving birth to his younger brother, a brother who had lived only 3 days before the physicians determined he was too weak to survive. I held him, Theron said one night, his voice rough. Just once, before they took him away. He was so small, so fragile. A pause. I felt something, holding him, something that scared me. And 2 days later, the stone appeared over my heart for the first time. Soren's chest ached. You were just a child. I was old enough to know better. His jaw tightened. Old enough to know that loving my brother would kill me. She wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but she held back. Physical touch between them had become both precious and dangerous. Each brush of fingers, each accidental contact, left them both trembling on the edge of something they couldn't afford to name. In return for his confessions, Soren shared her own. She told him about growing up in a minor noble household, the second daughter, the unexpected one, the child her father had never wanted. She told him about her mother, who had been kind and gentle and had loved her fiercely despite everything. She died when I was 12, Soren said. They said it was a fever, but she was healthy the day before. Laughing, singing, brushing my hair. Her voice wavered. And then she was just gone. Theron's hand found hers in the darkness, his cold fingers intertwining with her warm ones. My sister blamed me, she continued. Brilla was older, closer to our mother. When mother died, she needed someone to hate. And then my gift manifested, and she had her excuse. She laughed bitterly. A seer in the family. Proof that something was wrong with me. Wrong with the bloodline. Your gift isn't wrong, Theron said quietly. It's part of you. Just like this curse is part of me. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Acceptance, not pity, not fear, not the suspicion she'd encountered her entire life, just quiet, steady acceptance of who and what she was. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me. Not the brand, not the accusations. Just me. His grip on her hand tightened, and for a moment, his mask slipped entirely. Beneath the ice, beneath the stone, she saw the man he might have been if the curse had never existed. A man capable of great love, a man who was fighting with everything he had not to feel it. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after her arrival. Sorin was reviewing petitions in her study when Vadith burst in, her usual calm shattered. The High Oracle, Vadith gasped. He's called an emergency session of the council. Something about the curse. Fear seized Sorin's throat. She ran through the corridors, arriving at the council chamber just as the doors were closing. A guard tried to stop her, but she pushed past, her mercy proxy medallion catching the light. Inside, the council was gathered around a large table. Theron sat at its head, his face carved from ice. The High Oracle stood beside him, ancient and terrible, a look of barely concealed triumph in his dark eyes. Old Berith sat in the corner, her milky eyes troubled, and her gnarled hands clutching her staff. Ah, the proxy arrives, Mordrin said smoothly. How fitting. She should hear this. Hear what? Sorin demanded. The oracle's smile widened. I have discovered a way to break the curse. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Sorin's gaze flew to Theron, whose expression hadn't changed, but whose hand had curled into a fist beneath the table. Explain, Theron commanded. The curse was placed by a seer 3 centuries ago, Mordrin said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. It can only be broken by a seer of equal power. Someone whose gift has been bound, whose potential lies dormant. His eyes slid to Sorin. Someone exactly like our dear Mercy Proxy. Sorin's heart hammered. I don't understand. Your gift was bound, not destroyed. The power still exists within you, waiting to be unleashed. The oracle moved closer, his robes rustling against the stone floor. If we unbind your gift, if we channel it properly, you could break the curse entirely, free the king, free every future king of Valdrin. Hope surged through her, bright and overwhelming, a way to save him, a way to end his suffering forever. But something in Theron's expression made her pause. What's the cost? She asked. The oracle's smile didn't waver. There is always a cost with magic of this magnitude. The ritual would require you to take the curse into yourself. To bear it so that no king ever has to again. Ice flooded her veins. You mean I would turn to stone instead? Eventually, yes. But think of what you would accomplish. Generations of kings, free to rule with compassion, free to love. His voice softened, almost gentle. Is that not worth one life? No. The word came from Theron, sharp as a blade. He was on his feet, his chair scraping back against the stone floor, his eyes blazing with something that looked almost like fury. No, he repeated. I forbid it. Your Majesty, the oracle began, surely the needs of the kingdom. The kingdom doesn't need her death. Theron's voice was ice and iron. Find another way. There is no other way. Then we wait until there is. He turned to Sorin, and beneath the cold mask she saw it. Desperation, fear. Something that looked terrifyingly like caring. "You will not sacrifice yourself for me. That is a command." The room fell silent. Soren stared at him, her heart pounding and her mind racing. He was refusing the cure, refusing his only chance at freedom, for her. "Your Majesty," she whispered. "Theron?" Something shifted in his eyes at the sound of his name. Pain. Longing. A battle being fought and lost. "Council dismissed," he said roughly. "All of you. Out. Now." They filed out in shocked silence, the oracle last of all, his dark eyes fixed on Soren with an expression that made her uneasy. Old Berith paused at the door, her milky gaze meeting Soren's for just a moment, and in that gaze, Soren saw a warning she didn't understand. Then, they were alone. "You can't refuse this," Soren said as soon as the door closed. "If there's a way to break the curse, not like this." He moved toward her, stopping just short of touching her. "Not with your life." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why does it matter? I'm just a proxy. A tool. You said yourself we're not supposed to care about each other." "I know what I said." His voice cracked. "I know what I'm supposed to feel, what I'm supposed to not feel." He reached up, his cold fingers hovering just above her cheek. "But when he suggested you would die, when I imagined a world without you in it?" He stopped, his hand trembling. "The stone," he breathed. "It didn't spread." Soren frowned. "What?" "When I refused the ritual, when I chose you over the cure, I felt—" He pressed his hand against his chest. "Nothing. No spreading. No cold. If anything, it felt like—" He trailed off, looking bewildered. "Like it receded. Just slightly." Realization bloomed in her mind. "The prophecy," she whispered. "When mercy stands before the blade, the stone heart shall finally break." She grabbed his arm. "Maybe it's not about a ritual at all. Maybe it's about you. About choosing mercy, choosing to care." "That's impossible. The curse activates when I feel compassion." "For strangers," Soren interrupted, her mind racing. "For people you're supposed to judge. But what if it's different when it's personal? What if the curse can only be broken by letting yourself feel something real? Something deeper than obligation?" Theron stared at her, and in his gray eyes she saw something she'd never seen before. Hope. Fragile, terrified, but unmistakably present. "If you're wrong," he said quietly, "it will kill me. And if I'm right," she countered, "it will save you." They stood there in the empty council chamber, the weight of centuries pressing down on them, the impossible choice hanging between them like a blade. Then Theron stepped closer, and his cold hand cupped her cheek. "You make me want to try," he whispered. "You make me want to believe that there's something worth more than survival." Soren's heart soared. She leaned into his touch, letting her warmth seep into his cold skin. "Then try," she breathed. "Let yourself feel. Let me in." For one perfect moment, everything seemed possible. Then the door burst open. "Your Majesty!" A guard rushed in, face pale with terror. "The Oracle! He's taken his followers to the Eastern Temple. They're performing a ritual, something about waking the original curse." Theron's expression hardened. "What do you mean, waking it?" "I don't know, Your Majesty. But old Berith, she's saying the stars are aligning, that if the Oracle completes the ritual, the curse won't just kill you." The guard's voice shook. "It will kill every person in Valdren who has ever felt mercy." Horror flooded through her. The High Oracle wasn't trying to break the curse. He was trying to weaponize it. They rode through the night. Theron led a company of his most trusted guards, with Soren at his side despite his protests. She had refused to stay behind, refused to let him face this alone, and eventually, he had stopped arguing. The Eastern Temple sat atop a cliff overlooking the sea, an ancient structure that predated the kingdom itself. It was here, according to legend, that the original curse had been cast 300 years ago. Here that a seer had bound the kings of Valdrin to a life of cruelty. And now the High Oracle was attempting to awaken something that should have remained sleeping. They arrived as dawn began to break, the sky bleeding red and gold over the churning waters below. The temple doors stood open, and from within came a sound that made Sorin's stomach turn. Chanting. Low and rhythmic. Ancient words in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood. The curse's heart. Theron dismounted, drawing his sword. Stay behind me. I can help. You can help by staying alive. His eyes met hers, and beneath the cold command, she saw terror. Please, Sorin. I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I've only just found you. The confession slammed into her with staggering force. He'd never said anything like that before. Never admitted that she mattered. I'm not going anywhere, she promised. They entered the temple together. The interior was vast, a cavernous space lit by hundreds of candles arranged in concentric circles. At the center stood the High Oracle, his arms raised, his voice leading the chant that echoed off the stone walls. Around him, a dozen of his followers knelt in prayer. And above them, suspended in the air by some invisible force, was a sphere of pure darkness. It pulsed with malevolent energy, growing larger with each repetition of the chant. Mordrin! Theron's voice cut through the ceremony like a blade. Stop this madness! The oracle turned, and his smile was terrible to behold. Ah, your majesty, I wondered if you would come. His eyes found Sorin. And you brought the seer. How perfect. This ends now, Theron growled. On the contrary, it ends when I say, it ends. Mordrin's voice rang with power. For 300 years I have watched your family destroy this kingdom with their coldness. 300 years of planning, waiting, preparing. Sorin stiffened. 300 years? That's impossible. You can't be... The one who cast the original curse? Mordrin laughed. Why not? Who do you think the seer was who bound your precious kings? I was there, girl. I spoke the words. I wove the magic. His eyes glittered with ancient hatred. And now I will complete what I started. You cursed my ancestors, Theron said slowly, putting the pieces together. You created this suffering. Why? Because your great-great-grandfather killed my daughter. All pretense of civility vanished from the oracle's face. She was a seer, like me. He called her dangerous. He had her executed without trial. His voice shook with 3 centuries of rage. So I cursed his line. I made every king after him incapable of mercy, incapable of love, hoping it would destroy the kingdom from within. But it didn't, Sorin realized. The kingdom survived. The curse wasn't enough. No, Mordrin admitted bitterly. Your kings learned to use the curse, to make it a strength rather than a weakness. They became the Stone Kings, feared and respected, and the kingdom thrived despite my efforts. He gestured at the growing sphere of darkness. So I adapted. I waited, and now I have found a better way. When this ritual is complete, every person in Valdrin who has ever shown mercy will die. Every kind heart, every gentle soul. The kingdom will be left with nothing but cruelty, and it will tear itself apart. You'll kill thousands, Sorin gasped. Tens of thousands. A worthy price for justice. Theron moved faster than she'd ever seen him move. His sword sang through the air, aimed directly at the oracle's heart. Mordrin raised one hand, and Theron froze mid-stride, suspended by invisible forces just like the sphere above. Did you really think I would be unprepared for that? The oracle's voice dripped with contempt. I have had 300 years to perfect my craft. You are nothing but a boy playing at being king. Let him go, Sorin screamed. Oh, I'll do better than that. Mordrin's eyes fixed on her with terrible intensity. "You're going to break him, right here, right now." He waved his hand, and pain exploded through Soren's skull. She screamed, falling to her knees. It felt like her mind was being torn apart, like something inside her was being ripped open. The binding on her gift, she realized through the agony. He was breaking it, forcing her power to the surface. "Your gift was bound by lesser hands," Mordrin said. "I am the greatest seer who has ever lived. I can unbind you as easily as breathing." Visions slammed into her with the force of a hurricane. She saw her mother, young and beautiful and laughing. She saw Brilla as a child, holding her hand before the hatred took root. She saw the night Oren died, not through her own eyes but from outside, watching as a shadow crept into his room and placed a hand over his face. A shadow that wore the oracle's robes. "You!" Soren gasped. "You killed Oren, not me. You!" Mordrin's smile widened. "Clever girl. Yes, I killed him. I needed you branded, needed you controlled, needed you to be so broken and desperate that you would accept any offer of salvation." He gestured at Theron's frozen form, including the Stone King's bargain. "You were always meant to end up here, Soren. Every step of your life, I have guided you toward this moment." "Why?" "Because you are the key. A seer powerful enough to break the curse, but bound to the king by prophecy. When you love him, really love him, and he loves you, the curse will activate like it never has before. His heart won't just turn to stone." Mordrin's voice dropped to a whisper. "It will shatter. And when the Stone King dies, the ritual will be complete. Every merciful soul in Valdrin will die with him." Horror consumed her. "No, you don't have a choice. I've unbound your gift. I've awakened your power. And now?" He raised his hand, and Soren felt her own mouth opening against her will. "You will tell him the truth. The truth your heart has been screaming since you first touched the stone on his chest." The words rose from her throat, compelled by magic she couldn't fight. "I love you." The confession tore out of her, raw and true and devastating. "I love you, Theron. I've loved you since the night in the garden, since you showed me your wounds and trusted me with your pain." Theron's eyes went wide, and then his hand flew to his chest. "No," he gasped. "No, no, no." She could see it happening, the stone spreading, racing across his chest, up his neck, down his arms. His skin turned gray, then darker, the texture of granite replacing living flesh at terrifying speed. "Stop!" Soren screamed at Mordrin. "You're killing him." "That's the point." Theron fell to his knees as the magic holding him released. His whole body was shaking, turning to stone before her eyes, but his gaze found hers, and in his gray eyes she saw not accusation, not blame. She saw love. "Soren," he rasped, "I need you to know." The stone reached his jaw, crawling up his face. "I love you too. I've loved you since you stood before my blade, since you showed me that mercy was worth dying for." "Don't say that," she sobbed. "Don't. You made me feel alive." His voice was fading, his lips barely moving. "For the first time in my life, I felt alive. That's worth everything. That's worth—" The stone closed over his eyes. His body went still, and in the terrible silence that followed, the sphere of darkness above them pulsed once, twice, and then exploded outward in a wave of malevolent energy that raced across the sky toward the unsuspecting kingdom. Sorin screamed. The world had ended. Sorin knelt on the cold temple floor, her hands pressed against Theron's stone face, her tears falling onto granite that had once been warm skin. Behind her, the High Oracle was laughing, a sound of pure triumph that echoed off the ancient walls. "Beautiful," Mordrin breathed. 300 years of planning, and it's finally done." The wave of dark energy had vanished into the distance, racing toward Valdrin's capital. In minutes, perhaps less, it would reach the city. Every person who had ever shown compassion, every soul who had ever extended kindness to another, would die. Thousands, tens of thousands, because of her. "Get up," Mordrin commanded. "Your purpose is served. Now you can watch the kingdom burn." Soren didn't move. She couldn't. The weight of her grief pinned her to the floor, crushing her beneath its enormity. Theron was gone. The man who had shown her tenderness in darkness, who had trusted her with his wounds, who had loved her despite knowing it would kill him. Gone. But as her tears fell onto his stone cheek, something stirred within her. Her gift. The oracle had unbound it, torn away the seal that had contained her power for 4 years. He had done it to use her, to weaponize her love against the man she cherished. But he had forgotten something crucial. Sorin was not just a seer. She was a seer powerful enough to break a 300-year-old curse. Her hands pressed harder against Theron's face, and suddenly, she wasn't in the temple anymore. She was somewhere else, entirely. A place of swirling darkness and bitter cold, where voices whispered in languages older than kingdoms. The curse's heart. She could see it now. Truly see it. The way only an unbound seer could. The magic wasn't just wrapped around the kings of Valdrin. It was anchored to something deeper. Something personal. A memory. Sorin pushed further into the vision, and the darkness parted. She saw a young woman with hair like midnight and eyes like starlight. She was beautiful, radiantly so, and she wore the simple robes of a temple seer. She stood before a throne, her chin raised in defiance. "You cannot execute me for speaking truth," the woman said. "I saw what your son will become. The cruelty, the suffering. I tried to warn you." The king on the throne, Theron's ancestor, sneered. "You saw lies, fabrications designed to undermine my rule." He raised his hand. "The sentence is death. Then I curse you." The seer's voice rang with terrible power. "You and every king who follows. You will never know love. You will never feel mercy. Your hearts will turn to stone, and you will destroy everything you touch." Guards seized her, dragging her toward the executioner's block. But before the blade fell, she looked directly at Sorin, across the centuries, through the vision, as if she could see her standing there. "Find my daughter," the seer whispered. "Find what they took from me. That is the key." The vision shattered. Sorin gasped, slamming back into her body. The oracle was watching her with narrowed eyes, his triumph replaced by suspicion. "What did you see?" he demanded. She didn't answer. Her mind was racing, piecing together fragments of truth. The seer who had cast the curse had been executed. She had been Mordrin's daughter. But she had spoken of another daughter, someone taken from her. "Find my daughter." The words echoed in Sorin's mind, and suddenly, impossibly, another memory surfaced. Not a vision this time, but something from her own past. Her mother, brushing her hair by candlelight. Her mother, humming a strange ancient melody. Her mother, pressing a small pendant into her palm and whispering, "Keep this safe, my darling. It belonged to your grandmother. The grandmother they don't want you to know about." The pendant. Soren's hand flew to her chest, where the small silver token still hung on its chain. She had worn it every day since her mother's death, hidden beneath her clothing, never understanding its significance. Now, in the unbound clarity of her gift, she understood everything. The seer who had cast the curse had not died childless. She had hidden a daughter away before her execution, entrusted her to a family who would raise her in secret. That daughter had grown up, had children of her own, and those children had children. A bloodline of hidden seers, passing from mother to daughter for 300 years. A bloodline that ended with Sorin. "I'm her descendant," she breathed. "The seer who cast the curse. She was my ancestor." Mordrin's expression twisted with shock, then rage. What? That's impossible. My daughter had only one child, and that child was hidden, Soren finished. Protected. Your daughter knew you would use her grandchild the same way you used her, so she sent the baby away before her execution. She held up the pendant. This was hers, passed down through every generation. My mother gave it to me before she died. Fury contorted the oracle's ancient face. That's why you killed my mother. Soren continued, horror and anger rising in her voice. You discovered seer blood in our family line and traced it to her. You thought it was from a different lineage, one you could control. You killed her to prevent her from training me, from teaching me the truth. Your mother was weak, Mordrin spat. She refused to embrace her heritage, refused to use her gift. She was content to live as nothing, to let the power waste away. She died protecting me. And it was for nothing. The oracle raised his hand, dark energy gathering around his fingers. Because here you are, exactly where I need you, your gift unbound, your lover turned to stone. You may carry my bloodline, but that changes nothing. It changes everything. Sorin closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, past the grief, past the fear, to the power that had been sleeping for 4 years, the power that was her birthright, the same power that had cast the curse, the same power that could break it. What are you doing? Mordrin's voice rose with sudden alarm. Stop that. You don't know how to... Light exploded from Soren's chest. It wasn't the cold, dark energy of the curse. It was something else entirely, warm and golden and overwhelming in its intensity. The pendant at her throat burned white-hot, and suddenly she could hear a voice, her mother's voice, guiding her. The curse was cast in hatred, her mother whispered from beyond death. But it can only be broken by love freely given, not the love that destroys, the love that heals, not the love that takes, the love that gives. Sorin understood. Mordrin had designed the curse to activate when love was confessed, to use that love as a weapon. But love wasn't meant to be a weapon. Love was meant to heal. She thought of Theron, of his cold hands and warm heart, of the nights they'd spent talking in the moonlit garden, of the way he'd looked at her when he thought she couldn't see. She thought of all the tenderness he'd been forced to suppress, all the compassion he'd been punished for feeling, all the years he'd spent fighting his own humanity. And she poured all of her love, not as a curse, but as a blessing, into the pendant in her hands. The light intensified, becoming blinding. Mordrin screamed, and somewhere in the distance, the wave of dark energy stopped moving. When the light faded, Sorin was on her knees. The pendant had crumbled to ash in her hands, its 300-year purpose finally fulfilled. The temple was silent. The oracle's followers had fled, scrambling over each other in their desperate escape. And Mordrin himself lay crumpled against the far wall, his body withered and ancient, 3 centuries of stolen life finally catching up to him. But Sorin had eyes only for the figure at the center of the room. Theron. He was still stone, still frozen in that final moment, his lips parted around his last words, his eyes closed, and his face peaceful despite everything. No, Sorin whispered. No, please. I did everything right. I broke the curse. Why isn't he? She crawled toward him, her hands pressing against his stone chest. The granite was cold, lifeless, unyielding. Wake up, she begged. Please, Theron, please wake up. I can't lose you. Not after everything. Not when I finally understand. A crack appeared in the stone. Sorin's breath caught. Another crack, then another, spiderwebbing across his chest like ice breaking on a spring river. The gray began to fade, color seeping back into his skin, warmth returning to his flesh. And then his eyes opened. Gray eyes, no longer cold as winter, warm as a hearth fire, alive with something she'd never seen in them before: joy. "Soren," he breathed. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing, laughing, pressing kisses against his cheeks, his forehead, and his lips. He caught her, held her, and pulled her against him with desperate strength. He was warm. For the first time since she'd known him, his skin radiated heat instead of cold. His heart beat strong and steady against her palm, no stone, no frost, and just living, vital flesh. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. "You broke the curse. We did it." She pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. "Your love wasn't a weapon, Theron. It never was. The curse twisted everything, made you afraid of your own heart. But love was never the problem. Love was always the answer." He kissed her then, properly, deeply, with all the passion he'd been forced to suppress for 12 years. She melted into him, feeling the warmth spread between them, feeling whole in a way she'd never known was possible. When they finally broke apart, the sun was rising over the sea, golden light streaming through the temple's ancient windows. "What about the wave?" Soren asked suddenly. "The dark energy. It was heading for the capital." "I can feel it," Theron said slowly, wonder in his voice. "When the curse broke, the wave dissolved. It never reached the city." He shook his head in amazement. "You didn't just save me, you saved everyone." Relief swept through her so intensely that her legs gave out. Theron caught her, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "Let's go home," he said. 2 months later. The throne room of Valdrin had never been so full. Nobles and commoners alike had gathered for the ceremony, filling every available space until the crowd spilled out into the corridors and courtyards beyond. They had come to witness something unprecedented, something that would have been unthinkable mere months ago. A royal wedding. A king marrying for love. Soren stood at the entrance, dressed in a gown of deep gold that matched the sunlight streaming through the windows. Her hair was unbound, flowing down her back, and her forehead was bare. The brand was gone. When the curse had broken, so had the binding on her gift. The magic that had seared her skin had faded, leaving smooth, unmarked flesh behind. She was no longer branded, no longer marked, no longer an outcast. She was a seer, yes, one of the most powerful in living memory, but she was also so much more. She was beloved. The doors opened and she walked toward her future. Theron stood at the altar, dressed in royal white instead of his customary black. The change suited him. Everything about him seemed lighter now, as if the weight of centuries had finally lifted from his shoulders. He smiled when he saw her, a real smile, unreserved and brilliant. In the front row, Soren caught sight of several familiar faces. Old Berith sat in a place of honor, her milky eyes bright with tears of joy, and the seer who had first spoken the prophecy now witnessing its fulfillment. Beside her sat the Harwick family, Lord Harwick himself diminished but present, his children watching the ceremony with wonder. Soren had granted them clemency a second time after the oracle's defeat, allowing them to keep a small estate outside the capital. It was more than Harwick deserved, but his children had been innocent, and mercy was what she was made for. And at the end of the row, her sister Bryla sat with an uncertain expression. They had spoken several times since the temple, halting conversations filled with tears and confessions. Bryla had not known the full extent of the oracle's manipulation. She had believed his lies about Oren's death, about their mother's illness, had allowed her grief to twist into hatred for years. But when the truth had emerged, when the oracle's entire 300-year conspiracy had been exposed, Bryla had been among the first to testify against him, to reveal how he had whispered poison in her ear since childhood, shaping her hatred into a weapon against her own sister. They had a long way to go before trust could be fully rebuilt. But Brilla was trying. She had apologized for years of cruelty, had wept for the sisters she had wronged, had asked for a chance to become a family again, and for now, that was enough. Sorin reached the altar, and Theron took her hands in his. His palms were warm, his grip steady, his eyes shining with love he no longer had to hide. "I spent 12 years believing I would never feel this," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Believing I would die cold and alone, with nothing but stone where my heart should be." He raised her hands to his lips. "You changed everything. You showed me that mercy wasn't weakness, that love wasn't a curse, that the best parts of me weren't flaws to be suppressed, but gifts to be embraced." "You saved me too," Sorin whispered back. "You saw past the brand, past the accusations, past everything. You saw me, and you loved me anyway. I loved you because of it, because of your strength, your courage, your heart." He smiled. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." The officiant began the ceremony, speaking of bonds and blessings, of kingdoms and legacies. But Sorin barely heard the words. She was too lost in Theron's eyes, too overwhelmed by the impossible journey that had led them here. She had been an Omega servant, invisible and forgotten. She had stepped in front of a king's blade, driven by an instinct she didn't understand. She had uncovered a conspiracy 3 centuries in the making. And she had broken a curse that had haunted generations, not with violence, not with vengeance, but with love. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared, "king and queen of Valdrin, bound by oath and heart." The crowd erupted in cheers. Theron pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and fierce all at once, claiming her before the kingdom as his equal, his partner, his mate. When they finally parted, he pressed his forehead against hers, breathing her in. "What happens now?" she asked. "Everything." He smiled, and there was nothing cold left in him. "We rule together. We rebuild what the curse destroyed. We create a kingdom where mercy is honored and love is celebrated." His hand came to rest on her stomach, though there was nothing to feel yet. "And we raise our children to know that compassion is not a weakness, but the greatest strength of all." Sorin covered his hand with her own, her heart overflowing. She had entered the palace expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, prepared to live a life of cold utility, serving as a shield for a man who could never feel. Instead, she had found warmth, connection, purpose, love. The prophecy had spoken of mercy standing before the blade, of a stone heart finally breaking, but it had never mentioned what would grow in the broken pieces. Hope, a future, a happily ever after that no curse, no conspiracy, no ancient hatred could ever take away. They walked out of the throne room together, king and queen, hand in hand, into the golden sunlight of a new day. And for the first time in 300 years, the kingdom of Valdrin knew what it felt like to be ruled by love. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and they mean more than you know.